Well, we're going to talk about Jap maples. First off, how many collectors do we have in here? A collector would be somebody with multiples or wants more and looking for different varieties. How many people don't have any? Excuse me?
No. I bought them for people, but I don't have one myself.
I got you. Well, I mean, you get people that are collectors and they want certain varieties and they like certain things, and then you've got people that are just getting started, and so this is kind of an introduction. We don't get too specific, and earlier they thought I got a little specific on genus and species in Latin, and I don't mean to do that. I'm not trying to talk over anybody's head, but I don't really know any other way to do it. So what we're going to talk about today, though, is just the biggest things are where to put them, where not to put them, how to plant them, how to pick out the right plant. We were talking about puppies a minute ago. I mean, trees, not just Japanese maples, but trees in general and shrubs in general are like a puppy. You get it, it's cute. What's it going to be when it grows up? You know what I mean? Is it going to be, are you getting it for the right spot and the right use? I mean, you don't get a German Shepherd to go bird hunting, and you don't get a bird dog for a guard dog. So, I mean, and these plants are like that. So they have specific uses, and they have specific areas that they do better in. And so what we want to try to do is make sure you get the plant that's going to serve the best purpose and the best spot, and you have the best luck with it. Because we like happy customers and we like happy plants. And so by planting them in the right location, you'll have a lot better success. We will too, and the plant will do better. And you'll see some slides and photos on here of things of what one can be. And so that's where we're wanting you to get to. We're wanting your garden, not your yard. I get that from my brother P. Allen. There's not a yard, it's a garden. But sometimes I call them a yard. Anyway, this particular tree is a Kelly's Gold, which is not a Japanese maple, and that's not a good photo. But we've got a bloodgood here, and this particular plant was a cull. Nearly everything that's planted out front, I used to live here, and before that was a display garden for container plants. It was a landscape. And I planted all that stuff, and most of it was damaged goods that I couldn't sell that we planted to see if we could make it look like something. So this being a weeping green, this being a weeping red, this being an upright bloodgood. Of course, this is a real nice plant over here on the right that's a horse chestnut Buckeye cross, but this being Kelly's Gold. We're not talking about native red maple, which is typically a shade tree. So we get a lot of people come out and they want to know about red maples. Well, we have to distinguish whether they want an upright shade tree or they're looking for like a red colored tree. And so I want to make that clear because I've had a few people say, well, I want a red maple that's a shade tree. So we're not talking about those, but we could talk about them, but we're moving on.
But we're not going to.
Acer palmatum is the common genus and species on most of your maples. We've got a couple of different groups of them. Most of the maples are from China, some are from Korea, and I mean from Japan, and some of them are from Korea and China. Most of them are from Japan. The subgroups, there's lots of different ways of grouping them. I mean, you've got size, you've got color, you've got leaf form, you've got weeping habit, upright habit. Instead of getting into all that, we're just going to talk about the things that are the most people come out here and ask about. They want a red maple. And then we distinguish whether they want an upright red because they want something to get big, or they want a weeping form similar to this one right here that's a weeping dissectum form. And then we talk about that. And then there's greens, there's uprights, there's variegated, and all these. But the overwhelming majority of the people that come out want a red maple. And so that's why we talked about it's not a seedling red or an Acer rubrum, which is a shade tree type maple. But the differences in the uprights and the palmatums typically is leaf, but sometimes it's the structure and the habit of the plant. Now your lineal lobel, I call it lobel, it's not, I don't pronounce it properly because I'm from LA, Lower Arkansas, but I'll show you some pictures of the leaf. The good thing about doing a class now is that we're not that busy, the weather's pretty nice. In the spring when these things leaf out, we don't have the space or the time, and so I don't have plants up here with leaves on them that I can show you what the differences are. Let's see if this thing's gonna. Here are the leaves. Now this is your typical dissectum leaf. Here is a palmatum leaf, but it's a larger size. So what we're going to talk about mostly is going to be the dissectum, the palmatum. Here's your linear lobel, and here's a deeply divided. So there's 5 different groups right there, but everybody's interested in is either dissectum being this one, and the more like the Bloodgood this type, or maybe a Trompenberg like that, or Burgundy lace. And so it gets kind of confusing. So earlier I was getting over some people's heads, and so I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to let you know what they are and why and what they do and what they don't do. And since we don't have the plants with leaves on them, it's hard for me to talk about it without sharing that with you just a little bit. And most of the time, it's a collector that's looking for something different. I had a lady here earlier, she had 20-something plants. And so she had a list of some things she was looking for. They're hard to get because the problem with this industry is growers are somewhat entrepreneurial and they follow the money. And the money is 75–80% red being upright or weepers, 15–20% in green, the rest in variegated or dwarf or other varieties. And so I've had at least 100 varieties at this location or my other locations in the past, and we've probably got 2,000 or 3,000 maples now, but most of them are probably within 20 varieties just because the other ones don't sell well. And so after you get over your fascination with this interesting plant and you talk to people about it and they walk past it, oh yeah, it's all right, and they go to this next one, you get tired of yes ma'am.
When you say red, and maybe you're going to talk about this, there are different types of red. Some are red all year long, and some of them that I've bought, not here, but you know, they say they're red, but then they're green most of the year. We're gonna cover it.
The biggest thing that I want to talk to about cultural problems are Japanese maples are grown in zones typically 4 to 9. That's the USDA hardness zone. We're 7, 7A, 7B, depends on the winter. You know, in November we probably had a 6, which is really unusual. But the point being is that 4 is the extreme furthest cold, and not all varieties do that well, and 9 is kind of the furthest south because it gets too hot and they start burning up. We're very blessed to be in a zone 7 where we're right in the middle where we can use most or all of them if they're planted properly. The biggest thing, and I'm going to drive this home, when you leave here you're going to be sick of me saying, they don't like full sun. Full sun. In Arkansas it's a no-no. They do not do well here in full sun. Now, when I mean full sun, they don't like afternoon sun in July, August, and September. You can have them in full sun out here in the spring, and that's not a problem, but they can't take the heat. Now, not all of them suffer as bad as others. So, but I just typically put them all in one group. You plant them like a dogwood, you plant them like a redbud, they're understory plant, you plant them with azaleas, you plant them with hostas, you plant them where they're going to get morning sun. 50 or 60% sun is fine. They can't take the afternoon heat. People argue with me about that, but typically within a 5 to 10 year period, if they've got them in full sun, they deteriorate, and at some point they don't look good or they die or they have problems with them. So I'm not telling you you can't do it, I'm just telling you they're not going to perform well. So I get people come in here all the time, and some people live to be 100 and some people don't. Some people survive cancer and some people don't. Some maples will live longer and some won't. And I get that all the time. If you, down here on Colonel Glenn at Wendy's going in the drive-in, on Colonel Glenn, there's 2 big Japanese maples on each side of the entrance by Iberia Bank. And they planted them the first year or 2, they look great. I was thinking, boy, those things are really holding up well. Well, they're starting to look haggard now, and they've been down there, I don't know how long, but they're starting to look haggard. And it's what happens after a while, and we get some extreme weather. Afternoon sun, full sun is the worst. So you were asking about color. If you get a red maple and you get too much shade, it will not keep its red color. You have to make sure you get one though, like a Bloodgood or a Tamiyukiyama, which a Bloodgood's an upright palmatum form like Red Emperor, and your weeping dissectums like Tamiyukiyama or Nabi Sundara, or Sundari, depends on where you're from. It's potato, but if they get too much shade, they revert back to green. So you have to make sure you don't have a seedling that can be red and then turns green, whether it's in the right sun or not, and then you have to make sure that that plant gets 50 to 60% sun and doesn't get any late afternoon sun, which makes it scorch. We talked about this. I mean, if you plant it like you would a Cornus Florida, which is a wild dogwood or a Chinese dogwood, or you do it like you do your azaleas and things like that, you won't have as many problems at all. Typically, you shouldn't have too many at all. But That's a little start. If we do that, we have a lot better luck. Using them in the landscape, it's a specimen plant or companion plant to a specimen. Now when y'all came in, the front door, there's a really big one on the left side when you walked up the walk. I guess it depends on which walk you came in on. And then just to the west of that, there's a big weeper. And they both have some mondo grass under them. The large plant, that's an upright seedling, which is Acer palmatum atropurpureum, which is a seedling, select seedling of a green, which has red leaves in the spring but will revert to a greener leaf later in the summer, is that big, magnificent, multi-trunk, low-branched specimen. It's 20 feet tall and 20 feet wide. But it's a seedling plant. It will turn green. It will not stay red. The improved cultivars maintain their red color better. That's what you want one to achieve, is that one right out there. And it is bermed up and it's planted with mondo grass. The tall one, this one right here. That's, and then to the west of it, just over across under the walk, is a weeping red select. And it's a big one, but it's really cascading. And we have dwarf mondo grass under it just for a contrast in the wintertime. And it's bermed up. And what I mean about berming up is most the soil in central Arkansas is sorry. Does not drain well, have water problems. Sun's a killer, too much water's a killer. And not enough water is a killer. The biggest problem we have with people with plants, it doesn't matter what plant it is, and is too much water or not enough water. Those are the two biggest killers. I mean, it could be weed eater blight because you got a guy mowing your lawn and he doesn't care, or it could be your dog, but I mean, as far as what usually kills something, somebody comes out here, the first things we want to know about is too much water or not enough water. Japanese maples like moist, well-drained soil. Just like dogwoods, most plants. They're slightly acidic, so that means they're going to want something in the 6 to 6.5 in acidic range. Most of Arkansas is more acidic than that. If you're having problems with Japanese maples and a lot of other plants, you need to have a soil test done. Most people do not put lime out. Lime is something that you need to apply almost every year. If you've not had a soil test done on your garden or your yard, you ought to have one done. Most soils around here, if they hadn't been checked, are going in the 4.5 to 5 range, which is a little more acidic than most plants like. I like to tell people if they can be 5.5 to 6.5, they're in good shape. Now I've got a tree farm in Searcy, and we put out a ton of lime with airplanes on this tree farm every year with a flying on an airplane. And we're growing these trees in the field. And not just Jack maples, lots of trees. And we fly it on every year. And when I ask somebody, when's the last time you limed your yard or your garden? Well, I never have. Well, you might want to get a soil test. You may be way off. And so if you guys don't know, I mean, it locks your soil up, your fertilizer doesn't work, plant suffers, all your plants will suffer. Anyway, I know we're supposed to be talking about specimen and companion plants, but they won't maintain a specimen, or they won't be nice if they're not getting the nutrients and they're not getting the cultural care and the plantings and the moisture requirements that they need.
Scott, will you define what you mean by specimen? Is that just the largest, healthiest?
Well, it's just like you buy a small plant or you get a big plant, and it's a specimen would be a textbook drawing or a textbook picture of what it could be. That tree right out there in the front is a specimen. I mean, it was good enough that I sold a big maple that was a specimen. I've got a picture on here, and I'll show you in a little bit, to a doctor in town that was a specimen. It was a 70-year-old dissectum, 14 feet wide, 9 or 11 feet tall that I planted, and it's a specimen. I mean, it's like museum quality. I mean, as far as the Horticultural Society goes, it's like the pinnacle of what it's supposed to be. I mean, it just makes you weak. I mean, you know what I mean? They're just, I'm serious. I mean, just, if you like plants, I mean, it just, I don't know, I'll show you some pictures. It'll.
So how do you know when you buy them though, that it's specimen? You just from a reputable grower, or?
Well, you may not get you may get a good cultivar,
Okay.
but to get it to be a specimen plant is how you take care of it.
Okay.
And so you need to pick the right plant for the right place. You pick a blood good maple out that could be a specimen plant, and you put it in a spot you don't want it to get to 12 feet tall, you're going to have problems. You're going to be hacking it back. It's never going to be what it's supposed to be. It's like you picking out a Yorkshire Terrier and you want that Yorkshire Terrier to be a guard dog. It ain't never going to happen. So you know, you've got to pick the plant for the spot, and then let it do its thing, and then you have to take care of that plant and nurture it to become what I'll show you some pictures are, like that one out front. Most people can't wait 50 or 60 years to grow one. I've sold 2 plants that I consider, they're not the biggest trees that I've installed. I've worked on projects all over the country and sold huge trees and planted them in Dallas, Texas, and had 300-ton cranes setting trees over $12 million houses that I went down there and set the trees for them. But they wanted, the money was not an object. So we took them 35-foot bald cypress down there and we planted them. And we had helicopters setting stuff. And we sold 1 maple to Wynn Rockefeller that was about 25 feet tall, that was the biggest upright palmatum I've ever sold. And then this dissectum that I was telling you about, that's the biggest one. And they're just people that want that look, but they don't want to wait. And so they could afford it, they got it. And so you don't get many opportunities to do that, and it's been a real privilege for me to be able to fool that kind of stuff. And therein is why we have a tree farm and we grow big stuff, but the biggest thing we try to grow in Searcy is 4 to 5 inch caliper, because if you're an entrepreneur in any business, I mean, you follow the money, and after you get over that size, the clientele drops off dramatically. I mean, they're just not out there to spend the money. So you may have a field full of great stuff, but nobody wants it or can't afford it. And then taking care of it and then transplanting it and then taking care of it when they get it is a big expense, and most of them don't do that. And so you start off with a small one. So then, but going back to the specimen and companion plants, I mean, there's lots of trees that are specimen. It doesn't have to be a Japanese maple. Crepe myrtles, oaks, willow oak, water oaks. I mean, any plant. We've got a wonderful plant out here that's a hybrid chestnut buckeye. It's a wonderful plant. You know, so it could be an azalea. It could be a bonsai. I mean, it just, if it's everything it's supposed to be, and sometimes that's what you want it to be. And, you know, it's just like a dog or a house or a painting. It's what, you know, what that person's looking for. Planted in containers, the weeping varieties tend to do a little better job. Now, going back up here to grouping Japanese maples, you've got your upright palmatums and you've got your weepers, and there's several other forms, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But what I want to talk, I got a little windy on the last one of these things that lasted too long, so I didn't want to get too carried away. The containers, the beauty of planting these maples in containers is, in a dissectum, is that you can have it in full sun in the spring on your deck or on your patio, and the sun's not going to hurt it. Then you can move it, and you can put it in the shade, or you can transplant it later into a bigger container, or you can plant it out in your garden. Now, what I've got here is a low planter, and what I've done is take this styrofoam insulation and you cut it and you put it in your pot. And so when you plant a maple that's zone hardy for zone 5 and you put it in a pot, you just bumped it 2 zones, typically 2 zones colder. So now you've got it in a zone, if we get some cold weather, it could kill it. So if you'll take this styrofoam insulation and line your pot with it, still have to make sure it's got good drainage. You know, there's a piece in the bottom here. I cut these out this morning. So you want good drainage, and then when you put that insulation in there, you wrap it with a fabric like this, or you just nestle that in there where it's completely enclosed so your soil doesn't get out, so the roots are enclosed in that. So you set that fabric down there and trim it off, plant it, and what the good thing about it is that air prunes the roots. It keeps the roots cool in the summer, keeps them warmer in the winter. You want to make sure you have good drainage, 2 to 3 inches of gravel in the bottom, or take another flower pot and bust it up and put it in the bottom. But then you can move it out on the deck, enjoy it before it gets too hot. And then when it starts getting hot and you don't like being outside, move it back into the shade. It may not keep its color as good, but it's not going to suffer. And so that's one good thing about putting them in containers. The other thing about putting them in containers is you can kind of control the size of it like a bonsai. I mean, it's like a fish. You put a fish in a small tank, it supposedly stays a little smaller. I hadn't experimented, I've read about it. But you put that fish in a pond, even a goldfish, they get big. And so that plant, when you contain those roots, and they're fibrous roots, you can control that. The beauty of this fabric, and I've got a, oh, it almost bit me. This is the same principle. We get a balled and burlap tree in, we put it in this basket. And this fabric on the outside of this basket is made that when we sell it to a landscaper, he takes it to a job, or yourself, he takes it to a job, he takes the tree, pulls this off the outside, and takes the wire and plants the whole thing. And so then the root system stays intact, the ball doesn't get loose. This air prunes the roots so that when that root comes out and hits that wall, the air root prunes it. And so then the roots go laterally instead of going out. And so you don't get a circling problem with it, and you don't get it where it's choking itself. And so this has worked really well for us, and you'll see throughout the nursery that we've got lots of those containers because we're having such good success, not just with Japanese maples, but with nearly all bald and burlap plants are performing better in this. The thing it does, it air prunes them. The basket, the wire stays on there, it rots, rusts down, doesn't hurt the plant, and it's just better for everybody. It's better for you, it's better for the plant, it's better for the landscaper. And this is the same principle for a small container. Say you've got a maple or any kind of plant that's in a pot, you can take this, fill it with soil, and put it down in your pot. Then when you get ready to repot it, you can pull this thing out. Your root system's intact. You're not jerking and pulling, tearing roots. It's going to air prune it a little bit. It would be better if you had this insulated, like I just showed you. I'm going to pass that around. You can feel it, but the roots can't go through it. So if you don't put that fabric in the pot and you just put that insulation in the roots, because the soil will get around that, they'll just go around it. And then what happens is the sun hits it, burns the roots. The winter comes, it freezes it, because your roots are always going to the outside. So the heat hurts them, the freezing hurts them. So if you do that, you're doing several things at once. You want a really well moist soil. We've got different potting soils. You don't have to use what we have, but you don't want to plant it just straight dirt. You don't want to plant it just in a straight potting mix. You want to add some tilth to it, and you need aeration. That's another thing I want to tell you about. I mean, we talked about too much water is bad, not enough water is bad. Air is just as important as the water. I mean, they have to breathe. The plant has to breathe. Let's see. Rock gardens. A lot of people, or there's several people that have Japanese gardens or have lots of rocks. Yes, ma'am.
When you plant them in a container, is it okay to plant like other plants with them, or do they need to be by themselves?
No.
Like just annuals, change out your seasonal annuals or whatever.
I wouldn't do annuals, and the reason is because you don't want to keep tearing that soil up and messing up the root system on it. But now if you want to do mondo grass, or if you want to do some type of little ivy or moss, that's fine. I mean, you see a lot of bonsais will have that. But now I've got pots in front of my house by the door, and I've got boxwoods in them. Now I redo those, and I put annuals in those because it's a little different, and they're tougher, and you're not. And I'm trying to keep them cut back, and every once in a while, every couple of years, we'll pull them out and put something else in there. But if you take the beauty of that fabric that we're passing around is you can pull that out and put that in a bigger pot later. Because a lot of times your pots will split and crack, or the plant gets too big. And what we talked about on dissectums is if you put an upright in these pots, they tend to blow over in a bad wind. And the weeping and shorter dissectums.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in.
Right.
Because I don't want to leave it at the house I'm at now. I'm like, it's coming with me.
Right. But what you want to make sure on pots is the top is larger than the bottom, so you can get them out. You don't want a vase. You don't want anything that's too tall. You want the base to be almost as big as the top so they don't blow over. And this particular pot right here is plastic, but it's a double wall. And so it's got a dead air space. So you're getting the insulation value without putting insulation in it. The beauty of this pot is it's light for the size of it. You can move it around easily. It's going to protect you from the winter, and it's going to protect you from the summer, but it's a double wall. But if you have a single wall pot, whether it be ceramic, whether it be Italian terracotta, whether it be plastic, if it's single wall, it's good to insulate them.
Would you put fabric in that pot?
It'll help. The fabric will help, and it'll help in a couple of ways. If you put just the fabric in there and the root can't get out there, like if you put insulation in this, there's some movement in that, and when that soil dries and everything, you can still get a little root pruning. It'll probably still work with that okay, but the fabric is so you can lift that thing out of there without having to tear it all apart, and it really helps with that.
And that pot looks really shallow for a tree. So
Well,
that's okay?
well, we have taller ones.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to show you the double wall, and also the fact that the base is almost as big as the top, and then you want it where you can pull it out. But this would work if you start off like a 3-gallon plant. I mean, most of the root system on Jap maples and a lot of trees are shallow rooted. I mean, if you came up to our farm and we dug a 50-inch root ball that's 3.5 feet deep, 90% of the roots in the top 12 to 14 inches on most trees, not all. I mean, Corcus bicolor, well, I won't get in, anyway.
Most of them.
But the point being is, what I like to do on one like this is if you plant it, don't plant it level, berm it up. So you've got a rise of 6 to 8 inches of soil. So you just imagine if you've got this pot out there, you've got this tree out there. Now this tree, that soil level's almost level. What I'd want to do is raise it up and have the soil come up so that it's elevating the tree, and then you could do a ground cover like mondo grass or dwarf mondo grass. Typically on this something this small, I'd use dwarf, and so you've got that radius coming up on it. Okay, so you're getting a little bit more soil, but then leave a lip down here so when you water it, it can soak in all the way around, and then mulch it. And so this is a 7-gallon pot, and that looks shallow, but this even could be raised a few more inches, and you're in still good shape. And that would give this tree lots of room to grow in this container for 5 to 10 years. And so you got a lot of room for movement. The beauty of these is moving them around with a dolly or moving them around, you're not going to break them. You get a ceramic pot like this one, they are attractive, but they're heavier, they're easier to break. But we've got them bigger, and we've got ceramic pots that are made like this. What I like about this crescent line, and not every one of their pots is double walled, is the protection for the roots. And that doesn't matter. If you're doing annuals, it's not that big a deal. But if you're doing like a spiraled boxwood, or you're doing a boxwood, or you're doing a tree form knockout rose, or anything like that, they're going to do better with this double wall. The rock gardens, I mean, a lot of folks have creek beds and streams, and they've got rocks and big boulders, and the jack maples lend themselves really well to having those cascade over those. And typically, you know, a rock garden could be and will include like a Japanese garden where there's designs with stones and pebbles and that kind of thing, but there's not a lot of that around here. The other big thing is, you know, night lighting, and I've got pictures of that too. We'll talk about it. We've got different fixtures up here and a transformer. If you don't have anything, it's not that expensive. You can do specimen, or if you have an existing system, you can go with an LED bulb, and I'll pass these around, and you can put LED bulbs in your existing halogen system, cuts back on the wattage, and you can add more fixtures, and you don't have to increase your transformer or change your wires out because the voltage drop. But again, the specimen part and the lighting is so that you're getting the benefit at night. And I mean, I'm sure you guys drive through your neighborhoods and at your home, and your crepe myrtles may be lit up, or your jack maples may be lit. I mean, it makes a really nice effect. Now here is some specimen trees planted out in somebody's front garden or lawn. Typically, I like to see a ring like this and maybe some steel edging around it to keep the guy with a lawnmower off of it, and no weed eater blight. This is kind of a no-no about if you're doing your own lawn maintenance. You might can get by with it, but if you're hiring somebody to do it, at some point you're going to have a problem. And I call it weed eater blight. And I don't like to see it, but it does help me sell more plants.
Those look like they're out in the hot sun.
Well, let me say, and you can grow those in the hot sun if you're up in Ohio and you're up north at the northern limit, or if you're in Oregon or you're in Northern California. Right. These may be in southern Ohio or Indiana because it's not around here. But I agree, and that's exactly right. But we're limited on good photos, and so I wish we could do this in May because then we'd have, you know, foliage that we could show you, but we're limited. Here is companion plants. This is that Kelly's Gold Maple in its best time, which is probably into May, with a color like it's supposed to be with a weeping red select out in front of it. That may be an ever red. Here's a northern garden somewhere where they've used a weeper, and an upright. And I can't tell how much shade they're getting, but it's probably someplace where it doesn't get as hot as it does here. And so it's a really big deal. I mean, we grow trees in full sun at our farm, and I've got pictures on here I'll show you in a minute. But the Japanese maples that we grow them on the west side of the property. But the beauty is it's not 50 feet to an edge of woods that are 60 feet tall. In the afternoon they get shaded, or we couldn't do it because it's too much sun. And in Oregon they're all grown in the sun. Now here is a bloodgood. It's the one that's planted out front. That plant, when I planted it, looked just like this stick right here without a limb on it. The whole top broke out of it when we were unloading it out of a truck. And so I thought, well, let me see if I can save that thing. So we took it and planted it, and it's turned into a magnificent looking tree. So they are resilient, they are tough, there are lots of things you can do with them if you give them what they need. They're all planted high. Here's a rock. They're all planted high. They get water. Here's a weeping green. I like to do weeping greens with upright reds, or I like to do a weeping red with an upright green as a contrast for color and texture. And it's also for the winter time when they're dormant and deciduous with lighting. Here are some in containers. These are most dwarf varieties. That picture's not good because you can't tell what they are because of the backdrop. But if you look at the containers, most of them have a large bottom. Most of them have a top that's a little larger. These are all planted level because the pots aren't that great. When you get a wide one like this, you can kind of berm it up. It's kind of neat looking. But these are mostly dwarf varieties, don't get real big, and they also stay small when they're in a container. And there's different styles and different looks there. It's not a very good picture, but we're working on it. Here's your night lighting. There's an upright, blood good, weeping dissectum. It's kind of washed the color out right here because of the light on it. But you can get a dramatic look on lighting by putting lights in the front, throwing cast shadows on the walls, or you can throw lights up in the trees and the texture in the foliage, and you get lots of different looks. Now, that lighting's not just for Japanese maples. I mean, it can be your crepe myrtles, it can be lots of different plants. And then the other thing you can do is put lights up in the top of the tree, shining down. Like say you had a conical evergreen holly or something, you can shine lights down on it. You shine a light up in a holly, you're not going to get a lot of effect out of it unless it's just on the trunk. But the beauty of these things is you can get interesting form in the winter, and you can get a double duty by lighting them up at night and get some enjoyment out of them. And it's not just your Japanese maples. There's lots and lots of plants that have merit for that. And it's not that hard to get an inexpensive transformer, and these fixtures are not that expensive. You can do it yourself. You don't have to hire an electrician to come do that. It's low voltage. You cut one with a shovel. It's not going to hurt you. They use 1/10 of the halogen. They don't get that hot. They'll last for years with LED. Here is bloodgood. What's interesting about bloodgood is the seed hanging down from it. It's interesting. Did all y'all get a handout that says you notice on there's some that says RHS on there? That's the Royal Horticultural Society's garden merit plants. Bloodgood is in that. Bloodgood is several of the plants we have here are winners of that. Now that one won that in the 50s. It takes a long time for a plant to win that because they want to see how big they get and how long they last. But a lot of the plants that we have that we're selling and on that list, we've added that on there, let you know it's an award winner, and then it'll have a brief description of why, or you can look it up and see why it is. So just because there's 300 or 400 varieties, and just because they've been growing them for 500 or 600 years, some are better than others, and some have better merit, and then some do better here in this environment than others. So that's something to keep in mind. Burgundy lace, I really like. It gets about 12 to 15 feet tall. It has almost a dissectum leaf. It's an upright palmatum form. It has a kind of a cascading form. If you have an area that you don't want a big one, burgundy lace is a really good choice for a medium to small tree that will be close to half the size of Bloodgood or Emperor One. It's one of my favorites. I think it says on there it's one of my picks because of form, size, color. It's just a really good plant. So the beauty of that is you could have a weeper in front of it, you could have a upright palmatum behind it, and so you could layer and texture with 3 different plants using that one.
Can you prune those back some? Yeah, I have one and it's getting. I'm gonna
go over pruning and fertilization and all that stuff. Okay. You bet. It's a good question. I'll get you. I'll have you fixed up before you leave.
Yeah, I need that.
Crimson Queen is a really good dissectum in a weeping form. It's popular. It's been around a long time. These leaves are from another tree that fell into it, so don't think that's something wrong with it. But it's a good one. Tamiyukiyama, Anabi Shindari, depending on where you're from. Crimson Queen, those are all good weeping reds. Red Select, Ever Red, those two cultivars are kind of off of Tamiyukiyama. And talking a little bit about the history, Japanese maples have been around a long time, and a lot of times a perfect example is Emperor One. Has anybody heard of Emperor One? Has anybody heard of Red Emperor? They're the same plant. Guy that didn't want to pay the royalties named it something different, and so there's a lot of that goes on, and there's little bitty minute differences a lot of times in some of these trees. A lot of times it's the form, it's the leaf, it's when the leaf emerges. Red Select or Tamiyukiyama, and so it can get real confusing. So that's why if you're not a collector and you're not looking for something real specific, it's upright red, upright green, weeping green, and so it gets kind of basic, but the thing is it can get so detail oriented it'll drive you crazy. If you're not a collector and you don't have lots of them, then you're in a good spot because it doesn't matter what you kind of start with as long as you get the right plant for the right place. That is a big maple. Here is Emperor One, which is also Red Emperor, or I've got Red Emperor and Emperor One. I imported these from Duncan and Davies in New Zealand, and those guys had a patent, and then I could get other ones that didn't have a patent. But it's basically the same plant. Now a lot of people see that as a blood good. The difference is this leaf is more deeply divided than a blood good, and the color's a little darker and it's almost translucent. A blood good's going to have a dark or kind of a shiny green back to the leaf. It's going to be a little shorter. It's not going to be as elongated. It's not going to be as deeply divided. The beauty of this plant is in the spring when it starts leafing out and the morning sun comes up and you go out there and look through it, it's almost like somebody's lighting it up. I mean, it's just like takes your breath away, especially when it gets big. This particular picture, I doubt, is a Emperor One. It hadn't been out long enough. It could be, but this is a relatively new plant as far as plants go, and I would say that in the next 20 years it'll probably get picked as an RHS Garden Merit winner, but you know, 50 or 100 years isn't very long on plants. And there are some in England that are 150 years old that are like 30 to 35 feet tall in different cultivars, and we will say they're 20 to 25 feet tall, and typically what they do is they do that at about 50 years old. And so when a plant has not been around 50 years, they don't know how it's going to be, they don't know how they're going to pick it. And so people say to me all the time, and I've got some plants on here that are new cultivars that are patented, that are friends of mine and got them. People say, how big is it going to get? And I just go, I don't know. I mean, but we're not probably all going to have to worry about that. Here's Fireglow. Fireglow is kind of like a blood good. It didn't get quite as big. These are ones we have at the office, some of them. Some of them are field grown, and we've got some in containers. It's a good cultivar. Garnet is a really good weeping green one. Again, if you take this plant and you put it where it gets less than 50% sun, it's going to revert back and have more green tint, and the leaves on the underside, and not just this plant, all of them, are going to have more green tint to them. So your question was, why are yours not red? It's either two things. One, too much shade, or two, too much shade and it's not a improved cultivar that is supposed to stay red all the time.
I think it's too much shade, to tell you the truth.
Right. And so those are two things you have to think about. If the color is not critical, and you want a good, you have a nice shady spot and you like the structure or the form of the plant, then don't let that stop you from putting it in there. But what you can do is you can go in and trim your trees up, or you can thin the branching out to get some more sun in there on it. And so that will help your dogwoods and some of your other plants if it's too shady. But that's something that we can help you or talk to you about. Anabis are really nice. Anabis, in some of the books, in this book that I've got right here, it talks about it being one of the older cultivars, but it talks about it getting like 16 feet tall. I'll let you pass that around just for a second. I can show you how you can make almost every one of the weepers that tall, and I can show you how to do that. But they're talking about if they plant it and they let it do its own thing. Now, a lot of the books and even our page that we have here, it doesn't say it gets that big. Well, the one that's that big is 150 years old. But I mean, so you know, it's as long as it is tall. I mean, you can nip it back, keep them smaller, like you were talking about pruning. They prune well, uprights and weepers, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But my point being is, when you look in a book and it says the plant gets 20, 25 feet tall, typically that's going to be in a 40 or 50 year span. I know plants that are 80 and 90, 100 years old, they're a lot bigger than that. And I know guys that their families planted them and they're huge. Blue Atlantic cedars. I mean, I think our thing on the Cedars Atlantic glauca says it gets 40 feet tall. Well, I know some that are 100 feet tall, but they're 150 years old. So it's all relative. Here is Scott Mallory. He is a propagator and plant grower in Gresham and Boring, Oregon. The plant that he patented is Orange Flame. It's an upright palmatum with a green leaf that has great fall color, and the new growth is orange, hence its name Orange Flame. It gets big. Now, if you had that plant with like a Sierra Yew, which we'll talk about Sierra Yew in a minute, and Sierra Yew means blue dragon in Japanese. We'll talk about Shishigashira, and Shishigashira is female lion. A lot of people get it confused with lion head, but there's a male lion and there's a female lion, and the female lion is Shishigashira, and it's better than the male variety. But this plant has a lot of merit because it has vigorous growth, it has good new growth color, it has good fall color, and it gets large. And there's not very many of those available in the country because they're kind of limited on where you can get them. He's the guy that found it. And how he started that with is he may have lined out seed in the field, or he bought seedlings and lined them out in the field to grow them to make grafting plants so that you could take a bud or a chip bud and graft bloodgood or a weeper onto the parent plant, which is Acer palmatum, which is the rootstock. And he noticed that that plant had different color, different characteristics, so he pulled it out and he selected it. He grew it off to see what it would do, and then he patented it. And that's how most of these cultivars have come up. Now, a lot of them are sports off seed, or they're seed sports, but to keep that thing true, they have to graft it, or they have to chip bud it. And we're not going to get into all that. I used to do that when I was a kid, and it's a lot of work on your knees going through the field, tying rubber bands and chip budding and stuff. But it takes years to come up with a new plant. It takes years to cultivate that plant to find out if it has merit. And that's why to win that Royal Horticulture Society's award is a big deal. It takes years. Now there's some new plants out like Emperor 1 that hadn't won it yet, and I personally think it's better than Bloodgood. And I'll tell you exactly why. I have thin wallet syndrome because of it. And what I mean is, I've got a field full of maples in Oregon that are mine in the field, growing in the field. We had some winter damage. The Bloodgood's got some winter damage. Emperor 1's right next to them, no winter damage. Emperor 1 leaves out a little bit later. It's a little more cold hardy. In the books it says it's the same. I can tell you from first-hand experience, it's not. Emperor 1, I feel like, is a better plant. Not just because of that translucent leaf, not just because it's more deeply divided, not just because it's a little more interesting, it is a little tougher. So, to me, but when Bloodgood came out, well, nothing else rivaled it. After a long period of time, it got that award. I will bet you Emperor 1 or Red Emperor will get it at some point. I hope I'm around to see it. This is not a good picture. This is my garden. Should have done a better job. I've got rhododendrons that are named after my wife, Michelle Smith rhododendrons, that were named after her because I knew a hybridizer and he was looking for names and we picked out some, and he named one Lisanne Rockefeller when we were working on them for her. And the prettiest one was named after my wife, which has been a better cultivar, and now they're growing it and selling it all over the place, and Lisanne Rockefeller's got dropped. But the point is, this is pink lace. Now it's a weeping dissectum in a green form, and the new growth on it is pink. It's not readily available because it hasn't been that big a deal to get one. The grower, Rick Young, gave this one to me, and behind it is a Bloodgood. And is anybody here from Benton? You know the Crib Shack or Crib Rib or Rib Crib?
Yeah.
That used to be a Hardee's or a...
Yeah.
That tree was in the front courtyard of that place, and they were going to remodel that to build that restaurant. And they called me up one day and said, "Hey, Scott," said, "you want that tree?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, "Well, you go get it." So I went and got it. It was a big one, and we dug it by hand and put it in my garden. That was it. So I've dug a lot of big trees and transplanted them, but the reason I'm telling you that is they are pretty easy to move. If you need to move one, right now is the time to do it. You need about 10 to 12 inches of ball for every inch of caliper. They're shallow rooted. Anyway, what I've got is rhododendrons and azaleas mixed around that like the certain pH. This one, I don't know if you can tell, that is bermed up, even though I've got all this soil specially amended by me and Pablo. I plant everything high. I'd rather give it more water. See, it's stressing a little bit from being a little dry than it drowned. So even with me amending all my soil at my garden, and I'm talking about tilling it in with tillers and, I mean, really doing it like you're supposed to do it, planted this tree high. What I did when I dug that thing, I had a ball in it probably 18 inches deep, probably about like that. I brought it to that landscape, I came up and set it down on top of the ground and put dirt around it. I didn't dig a hole. I wanted to make sure it got perfect drainage. That tree has not had a problem. That big tree right out front out there, same thing. You're better off planting them too high if you have a sprinkler system. If you don't have a sprinkler system, you still need to raise them up. A perk test we talked about earlier, you go to plant one, and this doesn't have to be just for Japanese maple, it can be anything. You dig a hole around here, you take that soil out, mix amendments with it, save some of that existing soil, that blend back with that soil, because that tree is going to eventually have to grow into that ground, whether it's straight black shale, clay, whatever you have. It needs to get used to that. You don't want to pit plant, because if you pit plant, what's going to happen is when it's wet, it's too wet. When it's dry, it's too dry. Okay? You don't want that thing sitting in a bowl. Take a water hose, fill that hole up with water, come back in 4 or 5 hours, you still got water in the hole, you got problems. You either need to pick another location, or you need to you've got to raise it up higher.
But you can plant on that type of soil if you build it up.
If you build it up. What I was saying about this particular tree is that there's a wall that's 14 feet high behind that at my house. All that soil I backfilled, and it was all sandy loam topsoil. The last 2 feet of it, I brought in super soil with commercial tillers, tilled it in layers 6 inches deep, so you can go out there and plant everything with your hand. And I still planted it on top of the ground and poured soil around the outside of it when I planted it. And I've never had a problem with it. So you could almost do that with everything. But the problem here in Arkansas, people tend to water too much. What I told you earlier is too much water is worse than not enough. I've seen people, they'll call me, when we have a rainy spring, they'll call me and say, I got plants dying. I said, well, is it too much water? Oh no, it's not too much water. I go over there. I don't even have to look. I just walk on the lawn. I said, you're drowning it. Oh no, it can't be. I said, yeah, you are. Cracker barrels. I've sold a lot of material to Cracker Barrels all over town and all over the central Arkansas. I used to get calls from their managers. Hey, our stuff's dying. I said, okay. I just take a pair of post hole diggers, go down to their store, go out there, scratch the dirt back, go down to the post hole diggers, dig a hole about 1 foot deep. You know, let's go have something to eat. Go back out there. Nothing, and the water system's not on. Hole fills up with water. It's because on those sites, they pack the soil to build the parking lot, to build the restaurant. It's solid compaction. The water can't drain. You dig a hole, it's less porous. I mean, it's more porous. The water comes to it. Everything's drowning. Now, I sold them material, but I didn't plant it. I didn't do the design. I didn't tell them what to do. So we get to sell them more plants. Guess what? They get to dig them up and raise them. I mean, and it's a water problem. And so it's easier to add water than it is to take it away. So air is just as important as water. So that's what I'm trying. I've been talking about that from the time we started, and it is a big deal. You'll have 95% mortality from too much water. The next thing is not enough water, and then the next thing is some bugs or some kind of disease. It's too much or not enough water. And it's not just Japanese maples, it's most plants.
So is it better to burn up most plants or shrubs or
If they,
when you go to plant them because of drainage?
it is. And it depends on your soil and where it's planted, if it's on a slope. I mean, people ask me all the time, well, how much water am I supposed to give something? I tell them, I say, keep it moist. I don't care what it is, keep it moist. Now, some plants like to be dry. Some plants like to be a little wetter. I mean, if you got, you know, Louisiana iris, or you've got Siberian iris, I mean, you can plant those in a bog, or you've got a chorus grass, you can plant it and it'll grow in the swamp. You know what I mean? But you can't take a bald cypress that you see growing in a lake and go plant it and dig a hole and it's sitting in water. It's going to die because it's not used to that environment. It wasn't raised in that environment. I grow weeping bald cypress. I grow bald cypress at our farm. People want to buy them and put them on the edge of their pond, and they want their pond to fill up with water, and they wonder why their trees died. Well, it wasn't raised that way. It's no different than them dropping you off in the Arctic and thinking you're going to make it. Here's Sangu Kaku. Now, Sangu Kaku is an upright plant with a palmatum leaf, and the thing about Sangu Kaku is you have red bark on it, and it has wonderful fall color. It has interesting green leaf in the spring and summer, but the most sought after characteristic would be the bark, and then fall color, and then just the fact that it's got green leaves. And it's got a lot of, it's an award winner, and it's a great plant for fall color. It's like this red twig dogwood.